We now call up item 14, submission on the Land Transport Management Amendment Bill. I hope we can deal with this reasonably expeditiously, folks. We're now into farewell time of some people. Yeah, twilight zone. Okay, so welcome, gentlemen. Robert, Harry, take us away, please.
Have we got the slides on the way? Anyway, we'll be very quick, and we'll try and get through our presentation in 3 or 4 minutes. So so this submission is on the legislative elements of government's reform of the way in which public transport is managed and delivered. There are more operational elements to come. The timeframes are very, very tight. As you can see, it's due next week, the submission, so we're recommending that a group of be delegated by this committee to approve the submission next week. You heard from Chair Donnelly earlier today, his request that he be part of this group. We support that. We think that'll be very helpful. So if that is the resolution of this committee, then our proposal is that we have the draft ready. Our aim, right, I should say, is to have the draft ready by the end of tomorrow, send it out to the delegated group, including the chair of AT, as well as local boards. Local boards will have until Wednesday next week to get their views in, and they'll be appended to the submission as a standard practice. And that will give the delegated group 2 days in which to sign it off before we submit it Friday next week. So I have with me Harry Stowald from our Transport Strategy team at Council, and Greg Milner-White, who's the Commercial Manager of Public Transport down at AT, and they will very briefly take you through the presentation and be available to answer questions. Thanks.
Sweet, we'll just jump to the next slide. There we go. Aware we're very pressed for time, so I'll keep it brief. As mentioned, the framework governing public transport operations in New Zealand consists of both the overarching legislation, primarily the LTMA, the Land Transport Management Act 2003, as well as a range of operational and procedural processes which sit underneath this. One of those key elements which sits underneath the LTMA is Waka Kotahi's procurement manual, which is likely to be amended as part of the government's Sustainable Public Transport Framework, or SPTF, reforms. But there are also other processes which sit underneath the Act and give effect to it. Now, today, this submission is specifically addressing the provisions within the proposed bill itself, so just the legislative framework which sits over the top. Input into the other changes associated with the Sustainable Public Transport Framework reforms, such as the amendments to the procurement manual, is being provided by the Auckland Council Group, primarily through Auckland Transport, through the relevant non-legislative channels. So noting the scope, we'll just quickly move on to the content of the bill and some of the specific areas we'll be proposing to address in Auckland Council's submission. So if we just look here at the 7 key areas of change which are outlined in the bill's general policy statement, the Council's submission will be structured around these 7 areas. If we look at the first one, which is that there will be new objectives for planning, procurement and delivery of services. The new principles proposed here increase alignment between Section 115 of the LTMA and Auckland Council's existing policies and strategies, such as the Auckland Plan, Transport Emissions Reduction Pathway, and the most recent Regional Public Transport Plan. So we think this is something that the Council can support. If we look at the second and third ones, enabling regional councils to operate public transport services and enabling different asset ownership arrangements. These are fairly self-explanatory and serve to simplify and streamline existing arrangements, providing greater options and flexibility for local authorities, including here in Auckland. It should be noted that they don't compel Auckland to change its current approach to public transport operations. They just provide the options which could be utilised if the Council makes separate decisions in the future to do so. If we look at the fourth and fifth sort of areas of change, supporting benchmarking of different service delivery models and encouraging greater collaboration between regional councils and TAs, that's territorial authorities. These are also fairly self-explanatory, and there's not too much to comment on from Auckland Council's perspective. Now, if we look at the last two, which are probably the most substantive, number 6 is improving the framework for exempt services. One of the most tangible changes here is an extension of the minimum notice period that operators of exempt services are required to provide before withdrawing exempt services which are identified as integral under the RPTP from 15 working days to 60 working days. That's a lot of words, but what it means is it would apply to around 4 or 5 services in Auckland which are identified in the RPTP as integral, but are also exempt from being operated or contracted as part of a unit. All of these are ferry services. The minimum notice period for withdrawing non-integral exempt services would remain at 15 working days. And if we look at the final kind of key area of change, which is clarifying the treatment of on-demand public transport services, there are several implications here for Auckland. This part of the bill seeks to expand the definition of public transport to include on-demand and shuttle services, but while also adding new criteria to allow certain on-demand and shuttle services to operate without being required to register with Auckland Transport. There are some potential concerns here around the impact this might have on community-based services, and we've had some really valuable input from the IMSB Secretariat about the potential impact on Marae-based shuttles or mobility as a service operations. So one of the key pieces of feedback we're proposing to include in Auckland Council's submission is to highlight the importance of ensuring that the proposed provisions in relation to this will not adversely impact the operation of Marae-based or community-based public transport services. So this brings us to the recommendations, and there's 2 recommendations before the committee today. The first is to endorse the direction outlined in the agenda report, the key element of that being that Auckland Council is broadly supportive of the contents of the bill, noting that most of the changes are enabling in nature and do not compel Auckland to significantly change its current approach to public transport provision, although we do propose that the submission should highlight a few notable points, largely technical in nature, where we believe that clarifications or minor amendments would help ensure the bill facilitates positive transport outcomes for Auckland. The second recommendation is to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, along with anyone else nominated by the committee, to approve Auckland Council's submission on the proposed Land Transport Management Amendment Bill by the 28th of April, which is next Friday. Unfortunately, we are working within very constrained timeframes set by the Select Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Harry, and thanks for a very business-like presentation there. Just to quickly go to any questions, just to expedite matters, so certainly I don't think there'll be any problem with endorsing the direction, and as far as the delegated authority goes, happy to be inclusive here with anyone who's got an interest in that, especially given the tight time frame, and we will accommodate, of course, Chair Donnelly's request, both as it goes to his presence and a letter, though I think the letter's a little hopeful, but we'll do that anyway. I think it's useful to make that point. Okay, enough from me. Councillors Darby, Simpson and Morrison.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I'm interested in participating in that delegated group. I took a big interest in the PTOM and eventually got rid of the exemption on Devonport, Waiheke to go. That's a more difficult one. But just in terms of Chair Wayne Donnelly expressed an interest, and I've been critical of Auckland Transport not engaging your unit, Robert, and I'm just wondering whether they are also doing their own submission, or is it just from our side? And if we can lead on collaboration and encourage them to do the same in the future, is there the chance that we could actually not just be working with Chair Wayne, but actually with their strategy unit, your unit, to make a joint submission?
So this is a joint submission, yes, and we've been working with relevant staff from AT on this, and we'll continue to do so over the next few days.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, thank you.
Just quickly, I wonder if you could do me a favour, because I had a conversation with Wayne at the break. What this looks as if is the government has asked all councils, right up and down New Zealand, without acknowledging that the governance for Auckland Transport mainly rests with our CCO, right? And so can you just remind the government that we have a different governance structure in Auckland? Maybe if we say it often enough, they might remember.
Yes, we can certainly make that point, and it's kind of inherent to our feedback on quite a few of the provisions, and that they don't apply to Auckland because of our unique governance arrangements.
Thank you. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a quick browse through to try and see, because I didn't understand what was going on at all. Am I right in my understanding that it actually removes some of the requirements for value for money from the PTOM? Is that part of what's in the bill, or have I misunderstood that?
I might be able to assist with that. the central sort of PTOM requirement of value for money and ensuring, you know, competitive access, etc., to markets has been, I would say, sort of refocused, if you like, as kind of now a broader set of objectives that are in the bill. There's still, I think, there's still a value for money. There's still a value for money principle that
it's been very weakened, right?
It has been weakened. That's correct, and that's. I think it's partly because the prohibition currently on outsourcing of local government, you know, in-house provision of PT services is now permitted under this bill. So it was previously that all PT services needed to be outsourced and contracted out. That prohibition is now being removed, and one of the reasons that, well, one of the aspects of that is that, you know, the access to competitive markets. Therefore, that sort of mandatory consideration has been sort of de-emphasised in the legislation. Yeah.
And the second thing was that it just seemed to me that what we'd be desperately looking to have happen would be sort of a greater emphasis on sort of efficiency and reliability, and this looks to be almost a shift towards, you know, mode shifts and other things that are not what I would have thought was a higher priority. Can you just make a comment on that? Is that, am I misreading that, or?
Yes, so the proposed bill does completely replace section 115 of the LTMA, which is the kind of principles which need to be followed when delivering public transport. It definitely expands the number of principles. It does add and sort of highlight reliability. I believe efficiency is still in there, but has sort of been potentially de-emphasised through the addition of other principles.
Very much de-emphasised, though.
But reliability is definitely one of the factors that's explicitly highlighted.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williamson. Member Renata?
Just really quickly, in your view, I know the bill is really technical in nature, but in your view, what would be the impact when it implements? Would there be any Māori impact when it's implemented? I noted a reference around the marae delivery there in your kōrero early, but...
Thank you, Member. This is definitely something we have considered, and we have been in conversation with the IMSB Secretariat to make sure we're not overlooking anything here. Probably one of the key factors to note is that the amendments proposed in the bill are primarily operational and procedural and focused on the processes through which local authorities plan, procure and deliver public transport. So the bill itself will not directly alter Auckland's current public transport system, and it is anticipated that usual engagement processes, including with Māori, would be undertaken if any tangible changes were made to the public transport network in the future. In terms of the operation side of things, IMSB Secretariat staff did raise that concern around marae-based shuttles or other kind of Māori-led transport solutions, which is something which relates to a sort of broader topic we'd noted about concerns around community-based transport options and potentially the unanticipated impacts that the bill might have on those. So that's something that we're definitely going to highlight in the submission and seek clarification around there to make sure that there won't be any adverse impacts.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Hills?
It was just a comment,
We'll come back for a brief. Councillor Walker, you had a quick question? The last one?
Yeah, my issue is just around whether this is future-proofed going forward for things like full electrification, energy implications, which will increasingly form part of transport, full self-drives, stuff like that. I can engage with you on that, but that's my concern, and that will mean increasingly interactions with other parties that may not be parties we're dealing with now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and a lot of the sort of specifics will be addressed through the provisions which sit underneath the legislation. So the LTMA Amendment Bill will facilitate some changes, and then the sort of rest of the Sustainable Public Transport Framework or any other framework that's created in the future would give effect to that and would deal with those issues. In terms of things like electrification and the issues that arise from that, one of the key elements that these amendments could address is some of the concerns around ownership of depots and the difficulties of private ownership of depots and the electrification and the costs involved there. Again, it doesn't compel council to take a different approach to what we already take here in Auckland, but it just provides additional options and flexibility that council might choose to utilise going forward.
Thank you, and that's the questions. I think we've got a very brief comment from Councillor Hills. Oh, sorry, there's recommendations up there incorporated. You, Councillor Darby. Yeah, so moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconded by Councillor Baker. Quick comment by Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. And just want to acknowledge you putting Councillor Darby in there, because him and I, have been lobbying ministers for a long time on this, and I know that many of the others around the table have too. I think this is a very good move, this change. It doesn't change anything, as the officer said, but it gives us flexibility. It doesn't drive down to the lowest common denominator. Technically, under PTOM right now, we're breaking the law because we've got slightly higher subsidies than the 50% that we're supposed to have, and we're paying, working with the companies to pay drivers more than what the legislation used to kind of nail us down to, when it was all about the bottom line, and it didn't look broader. And we should be looking at efficiencies and mode shift and all those sorts of policy changes, which I think PTOM was far too narrow in the outcomes that we want from a public transport system, especially in a city like ours. So I think it doesn't change anything overnight, but it does give us far more options, and I think long-term contracts and potentially having to bring things in-house if we need to, like we are with the boats and the ferries and things like that, I think does enable that. So thank you.
Okay, well said. And finally, Councillor Turner, sorry I didn't see you.
So is there any way I can have noted my concerns about the timeframes? This is an important thing.
Yep, so we will be writing a letter, Councillor Turner, expressing that very sentiment.
I want my name on it too, please.
Could we include Councillor Turner in
I think he was just asking for it. His concern was the deadline.
Yeah, okay.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried.
Yeah, I'm against.
Okay. Do you want it recorded, Councillor Williamson?
I want it recorded, yeah.
Yes,
I just think it's
recorded.
so much watering too.
And Councillor Turner.
And me as well. Councillor Stewart.
And Councillor Stewart. Okay, 3 recorded against. Thank you. Item for today.